Hi, welcome to another episode of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, this is Casey, and the part of my collection that we're going to be talking about today is the top 12 toys of 2012. Now you might think that's kind of an odd topic, seeing as this is 2019, but the other day I was sitting around compiling some lists of what I thought might make for some good episodes. So just the other day I posted the top 15 Masters of the Universe Classics figures. So I've compiled a few lists like that, the top G.I. Joes, the top Masters of the Universe, things like that. So you'll see those episodes posted over the next couple of weeks. But some lists that I already had ready were on my toy blog, which I started back at the end, I think it was December 2011, when I started doing my toy blog. And that's called Mike's Collection. Well, you can find it online at mikescollection.wordpress.com, so feel free to go check that out. I haven't been updating it lately, not really for the last couple of years. But every year I do post a best of list. So I didn't bother to do one for 2011 since I just started the blog at that point. But after my first full year of 2012, I did a list of what I felt were the best figures of the year. And originally I was going to do a top 10 list, but I always have such a hard time narrowing it down to 10. So I went with the top 12 of 2012, and every year after that I did the top 13 of 2013 and so on. So I have those lists now, and I did that at the end of the year, and I haven't revisited it since. So me and Casey thought it might be fun to go back and look at the figures that I named as the 12 best of 2012 and see if they hold up. Do I still feel that way? And yeah, I just thought it might be fun to go back and take a look. So I'll just let you know the rules I had for these lists when I posted them is the figure had to be released that year. So even if I got a super cool figure that year and it was brand new to me, but it came out the year before, 2 years prior, I couldn't put it on my best of list. And also I had to actually own the figure because I was putting Ninja Turtles on my list and stuff, and sure, those are $10 figures, and there are much better figures from Hot Toys and stuff that are $200-300. And really, if I was making a best toys released this year, they would all be probably those high-end toys, but I don't buy a ton of high-end toys. So it was really the top 12 figures that I personally collected that were released in 2012. So without further ado, let's take a look at number 12 on the list. So the first toy on my list, which I have ranked at number 12, is Wheelie. And Wheelie is a Transformer, obviously. You can see his Autobot logo right there on his chest. And so yeah, this is, if I remember correctly, I probably should have reread my blogs actually before I posted this so I could kind of remember when these things were fresh in my mind. Kind of what I liked about them, and like Wheelie here was not a like a main release. He wasn't somebody that was easy to find at Walmart or anything. But at the time, the Transformers, I forget what their line was called. It was called Transformers Generations and then Transformers Classics, and it changed names a couple of times. But basically, what it was Transformers based on the G1 style. We hadn't had those for a long time. We'd had a lot of like Beast Wars and things like that, and kind of around the mid 2000s they started back with Generation 1 style Transformers. And Wheelie here, I think he was some sort of exclusive, or they were made in Japan and only available in North America through select retailers or something. But I believe this figure is basically based off of, I think it was Jazz that had this body originally, and then they just tweaked it a little bit, changed the colors, gave him a brand new head sculpt so that it looked like Wheelie. And the main reason that Wheelie made my list is because Wheelie sucks. Like, Wheelie was introduced in the animated movie, and he was a dorky little kid Transformer almost. He was intended to be annoying. He spoke in like rhymes and just an obnoxious little thing. And the toy released back in the vintage toy line was just like a really cheap, ugly, unposable little action figure. Now, since this one was released, they released this figure. This is a more modern figure. And this is more true to the original Wheelie. It's still much better. It moves a lot more, and it looks better in every single way. But you see, he's still got that weird little kind of almost ball cap little visor on, which both versions have. But this is more like what Wheelie was like. Just this little annoying kid. You know, way worse than Bumblebee or something. Because when Transformers first came out, Bumblebee was kind of like the one that kids, I think, were supposed to relate to the most. And yeah, they just amped that up to 11 and beyond with Wheelie, who was just an obnoxious little thing. So what was so great about this toy was this came out, and I thought they made Wheelie cool. Like, it helps that he's got the same body as Jazz, but you know, they turned him in from whatever this vehicle was, kind of a weird little space race car, I guess. But you know, to make him like a real world car, and to give him this body, it looks like he bulked up, maybe he grew up, and then that head, it's still faithful to Wheelie, which I like. So it's a throwback to this character, but done in a much cooler style. So it's not so much that I thought Wheelie was the coolest Transformer release that year, it's just that it was cool they managed to make a character that I really didn't care for at all and turn him into a pretty decent figure. So yeah, that was Wheelie at number 12. So next up, I had Drago Man from the Masters of the Universe Classics line. Now, you might not recognize this character because, true, he is not a classic Masters of the Universe character. But even though the Classics line is mostly, or at least originally, it was geared towards making updated versions of the characters we loved as a kid, the line was doing well, and it was expanding beyond the original toy line. So they were giving us toys of characters that had appeared in the cartoon that never had toys before, or characters that had appeared in the mini-comics that had never had toys before. And then they even went out and said, let's create some brand new characters. So Drago Man was part of a subset of, I think there were 6 figures. And they let some people design these figures. Like I think Jeff Johns of Green Lantern fame designed Sir Laser-Lot or whatever. It's been a while, obviously, so I don't remember all the details. But there was like 6 figures in this original character line. And I didn't even buy all of them because I thought some of them were pretty stupid. Like I didn't buy Sir Laser-Lot. There was another guy with hook hands and something. I didn't buy him. But Drago Man, not only was he the best of these original characters, but he's just a straight up awesome figure. And he seems to totally make sense in the Masters of the Universe line. Like, there were dragons featured in the show, so why not have a Dragon Man? And he's called Drago Man rather than Dragon Man. And I just assume that's because Marvel Comics already has a Dragon Man. But you see these wings, which are articulated. I believe the whole sculpt is brand new. I don't think he had any reused parts. And yeah, he's just great with a ton of detail. Awesome paint job. Really cool weapon with that flaming sword. And yeah, this guy belongs on a top 10 list like all day long. But I am actually surprised that I had him so low on the list in the number 11 spot. Looking back now, I think this guy would rank much higher, possibly even in the number 1 or 2 spot, because I've loved this figure since the day I got it. I think it's one of the best figures in the Masters of the Universe Classics line, even more so than some beloved characters. This just came out so well, looked so great. But yeah, back in 2012, I thought he was worth the number 11 spot. So that's Drago Man. So next up, I had Kraven the Hunter. And this is from the 3 3/4 Marvel Universe line. So I'm having trouble getting him to stand up, so let's bring him up closer. So there you go. And you see there, he just had great detail in his face, a lot of personality. It's a pretty mean scowl he's got there. Really cool little necklace that's a separate sculpted piece. The vest with the lion head looks awesome. I love the painted detail with the wrappings on his hands. Some great sculpted detail on his legs, with the skulls on his knee pads. All those pouches. Rob Liefeld would be proud of all these pouches that Kraven's sporting here. And he has a knife, and he also had a really cool spear accessory, which had some stuff hanging off the top of the spear and everything, which I don't have handy right here. But anyway, I love this figure. I thought the Marvel Universe toy line started off somewhat weak, and I was actually really reluctant to start buying it because I had so many Marvel figures from the 90s from Toy Biz that When Toy Biz switched over to Marvel Legends, I wasn't buying those, and then when they switched over to this smaller scale, I wasn't buying these either. But then something happened pretty early on in the line, actually, within the first year or so. They started putting out some really nice figures with some really nice detail. And it was actually the Red Hulk was the first one I bought, and it really won me over. And then I started buying a bunch of these things and started collecting them. And yeah, this Kraven I just thought turned out great. And I still think it's a great figure. And I liked the scale that he can be displayed with G.I. Joes. Would he still rank this highly on my list now? I don't know. Because I'll tell you, there's actually no Marvel Legends on this list at all. Because Marvel Legends, in my mind, they weren't really a thing until a couple years after this, maybe even just 1 or 2 years after this. But yeah, Hasbro wasn't really focusing on the Marvel Legends line. They had kind of tapered off. There were still a few coming out, but I just didn't like the quality of them. I found they had too many joints and they were kind of lanky. But I did start, a couple years later, the Marvel Universe line here really fizzled out, and the Marvel Legends line in the 6 inches really kicked off into high gear, and the quality really improved. And we actually got a Marvel Legends version of Kraven, which is very similar to this one, a couple of years later. And you'll see here, he's got a lot of the same, like the cool skulls on the knee pads, all the pouches. Like, he's practically just an upsized version of this figure. However, I still don't think he's as good, and the face is really what makes up the difference. This guy's got something about his eyes there. There's some extra shadowing around his eyes. He looks meaner. This guy looks a little too clean cut, a little too hipstery or something with that mustache. This guy's goatee is fully connected, where this guy's got looks like he took some time to manscape there. And yeah, so I just don't think it's as good of a Kraven, even though it's very close. And it's in the 6-inch scale, which is now my preferred scale. But yeah, at the time, this guy didn't exist. And this guy I still think holds up as the better figure and one of the better figures from the whole Marvel Universe line. I like it a lot. So there's Kraven. And next up is a bit of a cheat, because this is really 5 figures in one. So I named Bruticus as my next figure on my list. And so Bruticus is a Transformer combiner, which you're probably all familiar with. That means there's different robots and they combine to make one big robot. So yeah, it's Swindle down there, Brawn, Vortex, Blastoff, and Onslaught forms the middle, and then when they're all together, they form Bruticus. Now, all of these were pretty decent figures. I'm not going to bother taking them apart and showing you each one, but I liked them all, so that was a way to cheat and get all these Transformers on the list together. Now, I actually do have Vortex, the helicopter, in double, so I do have him that I can show you on his own. So yeah, kind of a cool head sculpt, kind of a funky design. These guys were all in the Cybertronian modes. So back in the classic days, Swindle was a Jeep and Brawn was a tank, and this guy was like clearly an Earthbound helicopter, whereas now he's much more of a sci-fi looking version of a helicopter. None of them quite look like their Generation 1 modes. But I liked the figures. They were all pretty posable. They had nice colors, even if they weren't 100% accurate to their vintage line. Like, he's totally different color than the vintage Vortex. But yeah, they all came together to make a pretty cool combiner. Now, in hindsight, this isn't necessarily a great figure. He's very hard to handle. He falls apart. He's not easy to play with, and he's a little wonky looking. Like, you'll see his feet, how different they are. The one that's made up of the tank there, it doesn't have a whole lot of surface area to help him to stand. That's why I've got kind of that one leg kind of pushed back a little bit, and that's how I have to display him at all times so he doesn't topple over. And Bruticus just doesn't look very brutal. Like, he's so kind of skinny. The arms are sort of jutted out so far from his torso, which gives him kind of a weird scarecrow kind of look. But at the time, so I'd been buying these classics, G1 style Transformers for probably 6 or 7 years at this point. And some of the characters I really wanted to see the most were the combiners, like the Constructicons and the Predacons and the aerial bots, and we just weren't getting any of them, and I couldn't understand why Hasbro was not making these combiners. And then finally, they made Bruticus. So he was the first combiner that we'd seen in ages. So it was just really cool to bring that element of Transformers back. Now, since then, they had a whole line called Combiner Wars, in which they gave us a much better, much more G1 styled Bruticus, along with the Protectobots and the Aerial Bots and Stunticons, and we got everybody now. So this figure definitely is one of the weaker Combiner figures, but at the time it was all we had, and I thought he was pretty cool, so that's why he makes my list. And next up is this little guy, and I don't even remember what his name is, to be honest with you. This is from Takara's Beast Saga line, and depending on how old you are, you might remember the Battle Beast line from the 80s, which was a bunch of little small animals. They weren't articulated other than their arms, but they had little heat emblems on their chest that you rubbed, and it showed if they had wood, fire, water powers. Anyway, I loved the Battle Beasts. And come the early 2000s, when all the things I liked as a kid were coming back, like G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man, it was all coming back. Battle Beast is the one I was really hoping to see revisited. And they didn't. For several years, we weren't getting anything. And then finally, there was 2 versions that came out. So we got a version of toys called Battle Beasts, but they were more like Lego figures, and they didn't really do it for me. But then Takara in Japan made these figures called Beast Saga, which have a ton of detail. Like, look at this turtle's face here, wearing his little general hat. Like, how cute is that? So they made these figures, and instead of the rub emblems on their chest, what they did is they had these plungers, and he's even got a little turtle logo on his plunger. It was unique to each character. So you pulled this plunger back, and they came with a dice that had a logo on it, and you pushed in the plunger, and it would launch the dice, and it was part of some sort of game. I don't know exactly how it worked, because these figures were only released in Japan. And so that's why I don't remember his name, because it was some weird Japanese name, and it came with instructions about how to play this game with friends, but the instructions were all in Japanese, so I don't know how that really worked. I just took to calling these characters, I called him Saga Turtle. In the same way that when I was a kid and I played with Battle Beasts all the time, I didn't know the characters' names because there was no names on the packages, so I just called them Battle Fox or Battle Turtle or Battle Rhino or whatever. So when these figures started coming out, I just stuck with the same naming pattern, and I called this guy Saga Turtle, or Saga Turtle, however you want to. But anyway, I think I loved all these Beast Saga figures. They were very short-lived. They only lasted about 1.5 years, and then it fizzled right out. They even had a cartoon over in Japan, so I thought maybe it would get some legs and maybe come over to North America, but unfortunately it didn't, which is a real shame, because I really, really love these things. He had a cool little weapon as well, but I don't have that on him. Yeah, so really any one of these Beast Saga figures could have made my list. I liked them all pretty much equally, but when it came to picking at least one to represent the line on my best of list, I went with the turtle, just because he's bright and colorful, and that little general hat really does me in. He's awesome. So yeah, if you've never seen these things before, I recommend hitting up eBay and tracking some of them down, because they're great. So next on my list is, again, this is a bit of a cheat because I put 2 characters in the one spot, but this is Spy versus Spy. And if you don't know these guys were featured in Mad Magazine. I think pretty much every issue there'd be like a 1-page strip where these 2 spies would try and kill each other, blow each other up with bombs, and it always backfired on them. Anyway, I loved these characters. I didn't really read Mad Magazine all that frequently, but when I was a little kid, we had a Commodore 64 computer, and there was multiple Spy versus Spy games available on the Commodore 64. I think it was 1 through 3, and me and my brother Doug, we just played them to death, and we loved these spies. They're just so neat looking. They don't stand up very well, so I've got them kind of leaning into each other there, but let me show you in a little more detail here. Oops. So here he is. There's the black spy. His little smirk. His big old hat. There's not a whole lot of articulation on these guys. Their arms move. And I think that's about it. Yeah, just their arms move. They got those great shoes on. There's no detail really on any of this stuff. It's all very smooth, which is very accurate to how they were drawn in Mad Magazine. His little teeth are showing on the side here. Yeah, so he looks great. Here's the white spy. I think it's the same sculpt. Kind of a sneer on this side of his face. A smirk on that side. Now their hands are a little different. You'll see he's got one open palm there, and then the other one's kind of like karate chop whereas he's got knife holding hand here and kind of, I don't know, poking hand here. Now, it's been a while since I've dug these guys out. Like, they've been displayed on top of a bookshelf for the last several years. But I know they came with a bunch of accessories. So I have them displayed with the knife and this bomb here, which is pretty cool. But I think they came with at least 4 of these weapons. And I think they might have come with swappable hands here as well. So I could change it. So if I wanted him to hold a knife or something, you could do that. So yeah, just really cool figures. Something a little different for my collection. And yeah, so that's Spy vs. Spy. And next up, I have this little guy, who is Zodiac. And he is an outer spaceman. So let's get a closer look at him. So he's got that weird, crazy face under there. Cool translucent helmet. Translucent weapons as well. Pretty limited articulation. He just moves at the shoulders. And his legs are articulated as well, just front and back. But yeah. So this is Zodiac. Now, you might not be familiar with these guys, and I'm not, a historian on outer spacemen, but I know this is an old toy line that existed in, I don't know, I want to say the 70s, I guess. It was kind of before my time. But when I was a kid, I did have some little plastic versions of the outer spacemen. Kind of like those little green army men that you buy in buckets. Anyway, I had gray versions of the outer spacemen, and I had no idea what they were. I just knew I had these little alien figures. And they had some really cool designs, and Zodiac was probably my favorite. And years later, I found out that it was an old toy line that had a following, and the Four Horsemen, the same guy that sculpted all the Masters of the Universe classics, they had got the licensing right to the line, and they made these figures. So I bought 4 of them. Zodiac probably be my favorite, but they're all super cool. And I think in total there was probably about 10 or 12 figures that the Four Horsemen made in this line. And they released all of them in multiple color variations. So yeah, I'm not sure if this is the first release of Zodiac or one of the recolored versions, but I just think he's great. And really cool kind of retro style. And yeah, so just like with Beast Saga, this is kind of a small niche line. If you weren't familiar with it before, I recommend you go try and find one of these variations on eBay. So next up, I've got Leonardo. So this line of Ninja Turtles was based on a new animated series that they had coming out that same year. And I'm a Turtles fan. I had the vintage Turtle toy figures when I was a kid. And I was pretty excited by these new figures coming out. I didn't really get into watching the new show or anything. But these figures I thought were awesome. I still do. Like the look of them, I think they look better than the vintage toys did for sure. I like that they look a little, I don't know, grittier with this like bandages around their hands and knuckles. I love the feet on these guys. Just these big old feet with the wrappings. There's like more sculpted detail in them. They're not stuck in that kind of crouched position of the old vintage toys. And they had more articulation, so you can bend them at the knees and at the elbows. And yeah, just a really cool look. And I got all 4 of the Ninja Turtles, and any one of them could have been in this spot, but Leo happens to be my favorite turtle, so I picked him for that reason. He's got those sheaths for his swords. And yeah, this line showed a lot of promise, and I was excited about it. But very early on, I lost interest, because the later figures, they took away like all the articulation. They didn't have any articulated knees or elbows, and I thought the designs got much simpler, and the paint-apps got fewer. Like, Bebop is my favorite Ninja Turtle character, and by the time the Bebop figure came out, I didn't even bother to buy it, because it just looked so crappy, I thought. So, this line has just recently fizzled out, because there's a new Ninja Turtles cartoon out with new figures based on that look, and it doesn't interest me whatsoever, so I'm not going to buy any of those ones. But yeah, this one here I still think is a great toy, and it showed a lot of promise of what could have been back in 2012. So yeah, there's Leo. So next up, I have Jinx in her classic red ninja outfit. Now, as you can see, I never opened up my version of Jinx. Not for any particular reason. I think this is a great figure, and I admit every time I look at it, I do kind of want to open it up and play with it. But Jinx was a favorite character of mine from the vintage line, and when the modern era line started, I really wanted an updated figure of her. and it seemed like we weren't going to get one for a while. But then we did. We got a few of them. And so right around the same time this was coming out, we got this figure here from the G.I. Joe Retaliation movie. So you can see her in a little more detail here. And even though this isn't my preferred look for Jinx, it is essentially the same figure. And I also have this one in Tiger Force colors. Plus I got another version of Jinx in her like 2000s outfit, which I have opened up. So all of a sudden I had a couple of versions of Jinx to display. And this was a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, so she's a little more expensive. And as I've showed in previous videos, I do like to keep a few carded G.I. Joes up along the top of my room there just for display purposes. It makes a nice little border, so that's where Jinx goes in that hole there. So I decided, since she's such a nice looking figure, it's a nice looking card, and I do have other versions of Jinx in my collection, I would keep her carded. But this is the look of Jinx that I like the best, and I think it's an awesome figure. I think it would still rank pretty highly on my list today. So yeah, there's Jinx. And I've got another G.I. Joe from the Retaliation line in the number 3 spot. So this is Storm Shadow, you know, the famous Cobra Ninja. Now, I would totally believe if somebody out there doesn't like this version of Storm Shadow. There's something about his outfit that looks a little, I don't know, athletic or something, and a little less ninja-y perhaps. But I think this is my favorite version of Storm Shadow ever. I really like the look of it a lot. The gray breaks up the design a little bit. I just really like everything about the sculpt. You know, he didn't wear this outfit in the movie, so it's not like it's tied to the movie too closely or anything. It was just a unique design that came out with the movie branding. And yeah, I just totally dig it. It's hard to really say why. Storm Shadow is an awesome character. I have dozens of versions of this guy, and they're all a guy in a white mask, essentially. They're all sort of similar. And it takes a lot for a version to stand out to me. And this one here, it just, it speaks to me for some reason. I just think it's really cool. And yeah, this one holds up as far as I'm concerned. They have made some pretty cool versions of Storm Shadow even since this one came out. There's one called Ultimate Storm Shadow, which is very true to the vintage figure and everything like that. But I don't mind things that stray a little bit from the vintage line. I think this is, you know, faithful enough to the vintage Storm Shadow, but it brings something a little new to the table to make him a little more interesting. So yeah, that's Retaliation Storm Shadow, and I still think he holds up very well. Now in my number 2 spot, I have a vehicle, which is kind of odd for me because I'm really not a vehicle guy at all. I mostly just own G.I. Joe vehicles because I had to buy them to get the figure that came with it. Most of my G.I. Joe vehicles aren't on display. Most of them are in buckets where they're getting all busted up and damaged, unfortunately. And plus, I didn't even get my driver's license until I was 39 years old. I'm just not a car guy. I'm not a vehicle guy whatsoever. And all my Transformers are always in robot mode at all times. I never transform them into their vehicle modes. But when I saw this toy, which was another San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, I just thought it was super cool. This is a Cobra Hist tank, which is my favorite Joe vehicle. Sorry, my dog is whining at the door here. Let me grab Casey again. Alright, hi Casey. So yeah, as I was saying with Hist tanks, they're my favorite vehicle. You'll notice the only Joe vehicles I really have on display, you can kind of see one there. There's a brown Hist tank, there's a black Hist tank in there. There's a red, a green, and an orange Hist tank there. And even over on the Joe side, excuse the mess here, but I've got red, white, multiple Hist tanks. I'm a big fan. Oh, Casey. Casey, don't eat Grizzlor. Oh. Casey. Alright, keep an eye on her. Anyway, so here's the Hist tank, and it's redecoed to look like one of my favorite Transformers, Shockwave. Alright. Casey, get away from the spies. Alright, hold on a sec. Sorry. Right, so here's the Hist tank that looks like Shockwave. And if you're not familiar with Shockwave, this is the most recent version of him that just came out from the Transformers Siege line. So he has that cycloptic yellow eye. His gun, he's got a very distinct shape of the gun. That's it on his back there, but when he's transformed into gun mode, this forms the front of the gun. And so for the Hist tank, he's got that Shockwave gun, and on the front of the tank, they've got that cycloptic eye in the front as well. And then just all the purple, translucent purple weaponry and the cockpit. Yeah, just very, very cool. He came with some other cool accessories too, but this Hist tank is really, yeah, I thought it was the coolest. I thought it was super, super cool when they first put this out. It's not even the first mashup they did. One of those jets up there, you'll see that's a G.I. Joe Sky Striker painted to look like Starscream, which came out the year before, which I also thought was like very cool. But Starscream, as much as I like him, he wasn't one of my favorite Transformers per se. Shockwave was like probably in my top 2 or 3 favorite Transformers. So when they showed this, and it was my favorite vehicle mixed with my favorite Transformer, I just thought that this was an awesome mashup. The only thing that would make it cooler if it actually transformed into a Shockwave robot. But even for what it is, you know, it's a little dusty here. But yeah, I just thought this was a great, great toy. And yeah, I still think it holds up fantastically. And in my number 1 spot, this is a Transformer. Technically, this guy's name is Storm Bomb because he's not an official Transformer. It was right around this time that third-party Transformers were really blowing up and becoming a thing. Because a lot of fans like myself, I think we were really into these Generation 1 Transformer toys that were coming out. But Hasbro was so slow about giving us the characters we wanted, like the Constructicons and the like Bruticus there that was earlier on the list. And so one of the characters I was really looking forward to was the Insecticons. And Hasbro was not giving us any Insecticons. And so these third-party companies make these unlicensed versions of these characters. And some of the versions they came out with were just so much cooler than anything Hasbro could come up with. And so this is supposed to be the Transformer Bombshell. But they call him Storm Bomb, as I guess for legal reasons they have to change the name. And you'll notice he has this logo on his chest, but that's not a Transformers logo. Normally he would have the Decepticons logo there. But he does transform into a beetle, just like Bombshell did. But I feel just like a much cooler and a little larger than the vintage toy. This is exactly what I want modern Transformers to be like. Like, reminiscent of the classic, but bigger and better. And this guy does that in spades. He's got his weapon here is really cool with a real metal chain here. And you can spread that out so he can hold both of the hooks in each hand and have the chain dangling where he can swing that around as a weapon. I've got it wrapped around his arm right now. But yeah, I love that head sculpt on him. You can fold this up so that hangs over his head, kind of like how Bombshell would do. And yeah, I think this is just great. And a lot of the third-party Transformers of larger Transformers, like say Optimus Prime, those things go for $200-300 sometimes because they're so big. And these things are obviously made in limited quantities. These are the only ones I could really afford were the smaller characters. So this guy is kind of a mid-level, mid-sized Transformer. And considering he was an Insecticon, he was never supposed to be all that big in the first place. And yeah, I think it's absolutely awesome. Hasbro did give us a version of Bombshell, not maybe a couple years later. And so here he is. And this is a cool toy too. But comparatively, it's just so much less detail, so much less articulation. It's smaller. Now, mind you, this figure here was probably about $12, whereas this guy here was probably about $60. But you know, this is a decent Bombshell figure, but this is definitely not a best of list figure by any means. It's pretty simple and not much to it. I still felt the need to get it since this is the official licensed version of Bombshell when it did come out. But it by no means replaces this guy. This guy is still total awesome sauce. Love it. So there you go. Would he still top my list? He'd definitely be high up there. If you do go to my, if you follow Mike's Collection on Facebook, this is the banner that I've had on there for Mike's Collection for years and years. It features this guy because I still think he's just one of the coolest looking pieces in my whole collection. Although if I were to compile the best of 2012 list today, I think Drago-Man would definitely give him a run for his money for that top spot. But yeah, there you go. There is Bombshell / Storm Bomb. So that was my top 12 of 2012. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you didn't think this was a waste of time because we were looking at toys from 7 years ago. But I thought it was fun to go back and look at them. So if you liked it, please let me know because I do intend to post my other lists as well, my 13, 14, 15, 16 17, and 18 I have ready to go. So if you enjoyed this, let me know, and I will maybe fast track those other lists. If you want a spoiler alert, you could go to my blog and you could see all the lists. But anyway, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and so please subscribe to my channel, like the video, and yeah, leave me in Casey a comment. So until next time, thanks for watching. Look at that face. Look at that face. Oh.